What's up, everybody? We are back with another review. This time it is the PC release of Spider-Man 2. Previously, going into this, I had not played any of the Marvel Spider-Man games. So in the last week and a half, I played all the way through Marvel Spider-Man Remastered, Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales, just to get to this point to be able to play Marvel Spider-Man 2. If you are into single-player games, if you are into superheroes, if you are just looking for a break from PvP games, definitely go check out the Marvel Spider-Man series. It was a blast. I got Spider-Man 1 all the way back in the summer on the Steam sale for recommendation of my friend Ricky. Shout out to Ricky. But I had just kept it aside, and then Spider-Man 2 came out, and I was like, well, I'm kind of over Warzone and Apex at the moment, so let me try the Spider-Man series. So I played that, then I loved it, played Spider-Man Miles Morales, loved that as well, and that led us into Spider-Man 2, which is what we are talking about today. If you don't know, it's an open world game. It follows its own story of Spider-Man that is relevant to the other Spider-Man stories. There's definitely different versions of Spider-Man stories, whether it's the comics, the Tobey Maguire movies, the Andrew Garfield movies, the Tom Holland movies, in the current MCU. And so there's some different, and the Miles Morales movies, of course. And this is its own telling of Spider-Man. Of course, you're slinging around the city, beating up bad guys. You have traditional villains that have been in Spider-Man games in these games. And so if you're into the MCU, into Spider-Man, you're into single player games, this is definitely a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun. I'm not super big into the MCU, so there's stuff that I'm missing in the lore, of course, or just facts and things about Spider-Man and all that I'm missing. But I still enjoyed it nonetheless. It makes me want to go get into the MCU. So there's a lot to be said about that. And of course, if you want to watch my playthrough, I'll link the playlist and my single player channel, both linked down below. If you just want to look it up, it's J Christ Plays, spelled the exact same as this channel with plays on the end. So if you want to go check my playthrough out, that'll be linked down below for you to go check that out. And as usual, we're going to go through cons, so-sos, and pros of the game and kind of explain them. So starting off with the cons, this game was overcomplicated. If you look at the first two games, there was one skill tree. Now, obviously, you're playing one character, and we'll talk more about the dual characters later. But you're obviously playing one character, so there's only one skill tree, and so there's a lot less to think about. You're just upgrading the skills as you go. In this game, there was a skill tree for Miles, there was a skill tree for Peter, and there's a skill tree that affected both of them. So you have three skill trees. Now, some people might see this as a pro in some games because it helps, and I've talked about this in other games, make it your experience. But I just loved the simplicity of the first two games being mostly really about the combat and the story and the swinging around the city and all that. And so I think that they should have stayed with a more simplified thing. Just have a skill tree between both of them. Then you also have gadgets you can craft. Then you have suit abilities that you can also upgrade. So, and I mean, it's a way to get you to do some of these side activities, which we'll also talk about later. So you can earn more crafting materials. Essentially, they're like tech points, rare tech points, city points, base points. If you played the other games, you know what I'm talking about. And so it adds all that. Then instead of just like being able to swing around the city on your webs, now you have a wingsuit, which admittedly was convenient and I used it a lot, but it just added into this more complication, more things to talk about or think about. Now you had more now you had more abilities too, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but you had left bumper or L1, I don't know what the PC controls are, plus ABXY or square circle triangle. That was on the screen, and then you also had RB or R1 for your different gadgets, whereas before you just switch the wheel. Now, this is probably a better system, but there is just a lot on the screen. There's a lot of different things to think about, and of course, you could just play it with simple combat moves like you did before, but they just added, I think, way too much detail that takes it away from the simplistic identity that I think was very enjoyable at the first games. It doesn't make the game unenjoyable, and you can still play it more simply, but there is just so much more to think or worry about. And I think they did make things a little overcomplicated in that way. The next con is action cutscenes with no participation. We'll talk more about the participatory cutscenes later, but they were fun when you got to participate in the cutscenes, so it felt like you weren't just sitting back and watching, especially at the end of the game. No spoilers here, but at the end of the game, there is a very long cutscene and very little interaction with you. And when you do have participatory cutscenes, it's disappointing when you have a long action-filled cutscene and you just sit there and put your controller down and wait. And that did lead to issues with a participatory cutscene. I was like, oh, it's so long without participation, I'm going to put my controller down. All of a sudden, it wants you to hit a button, and I'm like scrambling to pick my controller back up. Maybe you just don't put your controller down. But I didn't like that there was a split in the action cutscenes. And then what's been talked about the most with the Spider-Man 2 release, and was definitely a con, was performance. I have a 7900 X3D, I think is what my CPU is. 7800, well, 7900? Whatever. 9000. Dude, now I can't remember my CPU and my vision's not boxable. Anyways, I got one of the best gaming CPUs. I have a 3080, so it's getting a little old, but I do have a 3080. I have 64 gigabytes of RAM. And so I definitely don't have a hardware issue. And there was times in cutscenes I would drop down to like 20 FPS. And I was averaging probably in the 70s somewhere, which 60, 70 is plenty enough for a single player game. I would say 30 in cases, as long as it's consistent, is enough, but we're so all used to 60 plus FPS, especially if you're on PC with games, that the low FPSs feel really choppy. And when it's not consistently low, and it's like sometimes in cutscenes I'd be at 120 and we drop down to like 30 something, it's like jarring to the eyes. You had that issue. Plus, you had an issue, and part of it was my controller cable, so it's not all on the game, but my controller cable was starting to short out, and when it was shorting out, it would like freeze the cutscene. And then I would have to unplug my controller, plug back in. Now, obviously, that's partially on the cable, but why is it freezing the cutscene? I've had that issue with Warzone, and it just disconnects the controller, right? I've had that issue with Apex, it just disconnects the controller, and other single-player games where it just disconnects the controller, right? So that's a bit of an issue, and so we have some performance. People were reporting crashes, which I waited to. The other reason I played through the Spider-Man games first was I wanted to wait for some patches to come out for this, so I didn't have to deal with crashes. And so people were dealing with crashes as well, which is obviously not a great thing to deal with. The performance is an issue, and they patched stuff, but it still lacks a little performance. And I found that I had some issues with Horizon, the Horizon games that were ported from PlayStation only to PC, where I also had that issue. So it might just be the PlayStation Studios porting things to PC. That might just be an issue that they have, and it's something to think about for PC ports. Eventually, I'll get around to playing The Last of Us Part 1 before The Last of Us Part 2 comes out, and we'll see if it's the same issue. And when I play through The Last of Us Part 2, if you want to review, obviously subscribe and hit that notification bell, because that'll be coming eventually. But so the performance issues were a little worrisome. It was mostly frame dipping, and once I replaced my controller cable, I didn't have that issue where my controller would disconnect. Now, it was towards the end of my playthrough, but where my controller would disconnect and all of a sudden it would freeze the cutscene. And so that was a little bit of an issue, but not too much. Actually, the only crash I had, I think, was while I was playing Miles Morales, and where my game crashed. So I didn't have the crashing issue, but the frames issue and a little bit of stuttering here and there, the freezing was definitely an issue. So the cons were overcomplicated, action cutscenes with no participation, and performance issues. And to the performance issues, I was also recording and streaming, so that's a little bit of it too. And so that obviously didn't help. But anyways, on to the so-sos. So we have the different skill trees, as I talked about, as part of the overcomplication. Now, I put this in the so-sos because it makes things too overcomplicated, but also, it's, as I mentioned, it provides you with a more unique, customizable experience. And if you watch my reviews, you know I'm all about a unique, customizable experience. Anytime there's an opportunity to talk about one, I do talk about it. And so the different skill point trees did give you that opportunity. If you liked Miles more or Peter more, or you just wanted them to be both kind of equal, you could decide that on your own. So I do like a lot of customization to your experience and decisions that you get to make. So I do think that is in the so-sos. Then in the so-sos, we have animation issues, which maybe this goes under performance, but like the finisher animations, or when you're fighting alongside Harry before things go awry, or when you're fighting alongside Miles, or there's a mission where you're fighting alongside Black Cat as Miles, and you're beating up an enemy, and all of a sudden the other character comes in, and you have like an animation where you two work together. And so there's a lot of cool action animations. And the only reason that this is on so-so, because even like Miles, I forget exactly what the move is called, the Energy Blast, the animation is so cool. And there's a lot of really cool animation in this game. But why it's in so-so is because there was some lazy animating, like characters that are kind of in the distance, their mouths don't move. And this was a 2023 game. It's not like the first Spider-Man where this was an issue, but it was 2018. You're like, all right, well, that was now 5 years ago. The game was out like 4.5 years ago. whatever. This is a game that came out less than 2 years ago and is now ported onto 2025 into 2025, and so you can at least animate mouths. If you can animate hand gestures and arm gestures and people walking around, you can animate mouths when they're talking. And so this isn't an issue for like any of the main or the main side characters or any cutscenes. But like when you're walking past them and they talk to you, sometimes their mouth doesn't move. That's an issue. I didn't really have any other animation issues. I just think the lack of detailed animation when you spent so much time on other animations in combat and stuff is a little disappointing because I'm not a game designer. I don't know how much it takes to actually animate a mouth moving, but I would have liked to see that. And then the final so-so was the side activities. I like that open world games, even though I don't participate in a lot of them, especially when I'm just playing through. I might actually go try to 100% these Spider-Man games because I think they're so fun. And so I do think it is a pro to have side activities because a lot of people that enjoy open world games enjoy the side activities, and the side activities are necessary for you to be able to fully upgrade, fully level stuff up, fully craft different equipment and suit capabilities and blah blah blah. And it gives you a way to do that without just having to grind levels and go like beat up enemies or something to be able to do that. It gives you rewards for doing more fun activities in the game. Why it's in so-sos is I think too many of them are too similar. In this game, you go find like Hunter's hunting blinds or Marco or Sandman's memory crystals, and you go and just beat up a bunch of enemies, right? So, and so there's a couple different ones where it's just like beat 'em ups, and so you do have ones like you have a photography one, right? You have one where you have to find your way into Prowler's stashes to go recover old Prowler tech that he's laid around the city. And so you do have ones that are unique kind of in that way. But like it's a simple puzzle. Back in Spider-Man 1 when you were unlocking the police antennas, you had to like match the wavelengths, and then you also had beat 'em up ones, and then you also had looting ones and stuff like that. And there was just multiple different beat 'em up ones. There was also ones for symbiote nests, and so they're a little too similar. So I put in the so-sos. So the so-sos were different skill point trees, good for customization, bad for overcomplication. The animations, the great animations were amazing. The simple background accent, I'll call them animations, just weren't not, or non-existent or poorly animated. And the side activities, great because it gives you a lot more to do, but so-so because some of them are kind of repetitive. So on to the pros, we have the dual Spider-Man story. Now, some people didn't like this. I thought this was awesome that you get to play from the perspective of both Miles and Peter and kind of completing a whole story instead of just like you're Peter the whole time and Miles calls you and sometimes you team up. I like that sometimes you're Miles and Peter comes in to help you, and you're Peter and Miles and comes in to help you. On one mission, I won't say where it was. You on one mission, it's a long mission. On that same mission, you're Mary Jane, you're Peter, and your Miles. And there's a couple Mary Jane missions, which some people haven't liked in the games. I like it. I like being able to have it from different perspectives. Sorry, I had to do something really quick. And so the dual Spider-Man story and then the additional some missions where you're Mary Jane, I thought was fun. Just giving the whole story from different perspectives and building it from those perspectives instead of just one with like the occasional phone call in the mask and whatever. So then the next one was the humor, the writing in this. If you're familiar with these games or the typical Marvel humor, that's exactly what it is. It is the typical Marvel humor. A lot of one-liners, a lot of stupid jokes, a lot of references to earlier lines and events. And so I thought the humor is funny. It's not a huge pro, but it's something that I put on there. Then we have the participatory cutscenes that I mentioned earlier, where all this action's happening, and then Spider-Man attacks somebody, and you gotta spam X, or you gotta use your thumbsticks to pull open something, or whatever. I like that if you're gonna have a bunch of cutscenes in game, because if you watch my reviews, one of my complaints is when there's too much cutscene time, and so you're like, well, now I feel like I'm just watching something instead of playing something. It's nice when you're gonna have a lot of cutscenes, like a lot of single-player games do, that you get to participate and feel like you're still playing the game and not watching an animated show or movie. So I always think that's good. And then finally on this list, and I actually have more I want to talk about in the pros I didn't put on this list, is the credit scenes. If you watch Marvel movies, like you probably do, like because most people do that watch movies, or if you're playing these games, I've seen a couple of them. One of the big things that Marvel does is they do mid and post credit scenes, and the Spider-Man games do that, and this one obviously continues that. And there's always a little bit of humor in them, or there's cliffhangers, or there's things that give you just a little more story lore, or there's things that are obviously leading into another game. And I just like that since this is Marvel, that they are continuing what you expect from Marvel. It's not a huge pro, obviously, but it's something that I like. And then something that's not on this pro list is just the overall gameplay. I think is fun. We have so many different open world games. You know, you can ride horses, you can drive cars, you can fly helicopters, but you don't really get to swing around like Spider-Man. Obviously, anything other than Spider-Man. And there's some games with grapples, but you don't really like grapple around a whole city over and over again, right? And so you have really unique movement around the city in this game. And then they added the wingsuit, which I still think overcomplicated things. But so you can swing around the city. You could run on the ground most of the game if you wanted to, really. Swing in wingsuits, and I just like that it's different traversal. And then the combat's fun. It is kind of just button mashing, beat 'em up. Now, of course, there's a little bit of strategy to the button mashing, but it's kind of just like button mashing, beat 'em up, which is fine. It's fun. And it can be intense, and certainly the gameplay can get frustrating because you can get overwhelmed, and then so you got to think about more than just button mashing. And I actually think the combat, although it can be repetitive, can be a little enjoyable, which is something I forgot to put on my con list. The NPC lines in combat are repetitive. The amount of times, get him on the ground, he's up in the air, like in all 3 games was insane. I would have rather not had dialogue. I forgot to put that on my cons list, but I'll mention it when I run through my pros, cons, and so-sos again. And so I thought the combat was fun. The movement's fun. It's definitely a unique way that this game plays, and I thoroughly enjoyed the gameplay of this game, as I mentioned earlier. So to run through the list again: cons, overcomplicated with just too many things to think about. Action cutscenes without participation because sometimes they're really long and they're watching, you want to put the controller down. Performance issues, just graphically, I had to turn everything down to medium just to get decent FPS. And with my hardware, I just don't think that should be the case. So-sos, you had the different skill point trees, which are great for a customizable experience, but so-so because it just adds into the overcomplication. The animations, the high-level animations, the action animations were awesome, but the accentual animations just were either lazy or non-existent, in my opinion. The side activities, it's great to have a lot of extra things to do because that's what you expect in an open-world game, but they can get repetitive, and they're not actually as variable as they make it seem. The pros, the dual Spider-Man story plus the Mary Jane missions, you get to add in all the perspectives of this story. Well, 3 of the perspectives. Obviously, you're not Harry, except there's one mission where you get to act as Harry. But from the 2 biggest characters and Mary Jane, who's still a pretty big character in this story, you get to build the story from their perspectives. The humor, it's typical Marvel MCU humor, which is funny, enjoyable. If you watch my playthrough, I'm chuckling, I'm laughing a lot. It's fun. The participatory cutscenes, which is great because you don't just feel like you're watching a movie or a show, you feel like you're still playing a game. And the credit scenes, just doing more of what Marvel does, like the humor where you get cliffhangers, some more background story, and you get excited for a new game. Like the credit scenes made me excited to go into Miles Morales, made me excited to play this game, make me I'm so anticipating the next game, which isn't going to be till like 2027, 2028. And then just the gameplay was unique and fun. And even though it can be a little button mash, you do have to think once you get farther into the game, and you could get possibly overwhelmed. And I did once again forget to mention the cons of the NPC voice lines when you're in combat, which is just not great. But overall, I thought this game was fun. If you put aside the performance issues, I easily give this game like an 8 out of 10. With the performance issues, which I hope they'll fix, like a 7, 7.5. They were bad enough at points that I could knock it down a full half to a full point. But it's definitely something, if you're into Marvel, you're into single-player games, definitely try out this game. It's a lot of fun, and I know a lot of people outside of Marvel Rivals and younger people on Fortnite are kind of over a lot of the PvP scene. You got a lot of cheaters and stuff, so take a break, play some PvE, play some single-player, and try out Marvel Spider-Man 2. I think you'll enjoy it. I think most people do enjoy it. These games get very good reviews when you can ignore performance issues, which once again can be hard to ignore. But those are my thoughts on Marvel Spider-Man 2. PC version. Obviously this game's a little older, so there's other reviews out there, but these are my thoughts now that it's been available to me because I've been Xbox and then PlayStation. But let me know what you think in the comments down below, and please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell if you like this type of content and want to see it first, and I will see you in the next review. Bye.
I think he just did.
I just want to see something. Right. Oh yeah. That'd be good for thumbnail back.
Gonna need you ASAP, Miles.
Yeah, I see him all right. I'm right behind you.
Miles? Miles! What did I just get myself into? You gotta calm down, Marco! Innocent people are in danger!
You care about them, but not me. They wouldn't listen to Marco, but they can't ignore Sandman.
Yeah, I don't care about you when you're doing this shit.
Miles!
One and only.
Oh my god, how are we supposed to
Any
keep
ideas?
fighting this?
Yeah. Class is back in session.
Class!
Marco's storm is generating a lot of electricity! What happens to the surface tension of sand if you turn up the voltage?
Hold you right. Like when I shot the mini.
A+. You absorb enough energy. I'll shoot it right at it.
You want me to get hit by lightning?
Can you handle it?
Only one way to find out. Doctor Man.
Oh, dude, the team finisher?
Bro, how is back here you gonna redirect the lightning bolt?
Like you said, gotta break out the toys.
I love the team finisher.
Came from?
I love finishing with Miles.
Now or never, Spider-Man. Time to move.
Why won't you just give up?
Because we promised to protect this city.
We good?
We're good.
Oh, that's insane. And I love the crystals growing out of it. That's super sick. But holy shit, New York City took a beating.
I have sand everywhere.
New York City took a fucking beating. Holy.
Marco, it's gonna be okay.
I haven't been okay for a long time.
If you need help, all you have to do is ask.
You're the ones who are gonna need help when they come for you.
What does that mean?
Come for us.
Who's coming for us?